I'm Chris Dean. I'm a fishing guide, light tackle skiff guide, and I also tie flies commercially. I've been guiding and tying flies, trying to make a living for the past 14 years. Before that, I worked for Baxter Diagnostics, a big international company that made blood chemistry analyzers, and I worked mostly in their quality control. I've got a bachelor's degree in biology. Right after I got out of school, spent 2 years in the Army as an MP. Every day that I had off before I started guiding, I went fishing. Probably fished like 100, 125 days a year. Probably started fly fishing when I was about 11 years old. Started tying flies then. You couldn't buy any saltwater flies in the tackle stores. They just weren't available, so I just had to teach myself and from books and magazines and try to figure out how to do all that. Taught myself how to fly cast. Grew up on the Coral Gables waterway, so there and the local beaches, Tahiti Beach, which used to be over where Cocoa Plum is now. I went over there, and Mother would drop me off, leave me there over the Saturday and Sunday, and there was a little flat south of there you could wade, and there were bonefish there. Caught my first bonefish there. The areas I normally fish are Biscayne Bay, usually the south part of the bay. Usually I'll put in down at Homestead and fish the Elliott Key and the Upper Key Largo area. And the other area I fish is Flamingo, and then fish both Florida Bay and from Flamingo all the way over towards the Keys, and also on the inside up in Whitewater Bay and the Hells Bay area and all that. What I normally fish for in the Flamingo area, you've got a little bit of everything. You've got snook and redfish and trout, and you've also got bonefish. If you run back towards the Keys, only about 10 miles, you can bonefish back that way, and you've got tarpon almost all year round, depending on the weather conditions. Miami area, it's mostly bonefish all year. Permit some parts of the year, usually when the weather's hot, like late June through October is a good time for permit. The tarpon migration is mostly May and June for the big tarpon that move down the ocean side. With the fly tying, like I said, I started commercially like 14 years ago, but I actually started as a kid when I was like 11 years old. Most of my customers now, I have a couple of shops buy flies, but most of it is either other guides or just individuals or friends. It's all saltwater flies, and I tie everything from bonefish flies to sailfish flies. And, do all the flies for the trout and snook and redfish, as well as permit and tarpon, and offshore flies for dolphin, bonitas, and tunas. Tide flies for people going to Bermuda to fish for the tunas and wahoo. Tide flies for people going to Costa Rica and Nicaragua and Venezuela to do the billfish offshore. I've got some of the outdoor riders. I tie a few flies for them, and some of them send me a few customers for their trips. I helped Chico Fernandez with his book with some flies for that. He's doing another book, I think, on redfish, and I worked with him a little bit with the flies for that. Plus, we did some fishing trips, tried to get some photographs of bonefish and redfish. As far as fly patterns, most of the time I don't try to develop new fly patterns. There's so many patterns out there that you can usually find something that somebody else has created that works good. But I get a little selective, and I wind up tying the flies maybe slightly different than what the original pattern was, just to fine-tune them. I do have probably about 8 or 9 patterns that I created myself. I've got one that I did back in 1980 for permit. Back then, there weren't a lot of permit being caught on fly, and I caught about a dozen fish on that pattern. I had a redfish pattern that I created about the same time, back back in the 80s, a bend back pattern, and there weren't a lot of weedless flies back then. At that time, they were still tying flies in the standard way with a hook down, and you had to figure out another way to tie them. The bend backs were just becoming popular. Actually, Chico Fernandez popularized the bend back patterns. And I also came up with a sailfish pattern, working with Bob Stearns, just a variation on the tube flies, and we worked out a pattern that worked real good. You know, the fishing over the years has changed, but it's kind of hard to tell whether it's really getting worse or, you know, some of it is actually improving because there's more restrictions on taking fish. The bone fishing, like I said, it's kind of hard to tell because when I first started bone fishing, I didn't know where to go and what to do, so you weren't that successful. And now it's a little easier. I know where the fish are and what tides are going to be there. But it's definitely changed and kind of gone downhill. There's a lot of pressure. You know, a lot of boats. If you fish an area hard for a couple of days, or a lot of boats fish that area, sometimes fish will move, and you need to find another place to fish. And you can come back there, you know, after it rests for several weeks, and the fish will be back. Tarpon fishing seems to be pretty steady with the migrating tarpon. It'll vary from year to year. Some years will be a little slower, and some years are just as good as they were 20 years ago. The only difference with the tarpon fishing is that the fish on the ocean side are getting harder and harder to get the fish to eat. Probably just they're getting more sensitive to the boats fishing them, and see that as some sort of a threat to them. When I first started tarpon fishing, every fish out there would eat. If you made a good cast, threw the fly in front of them, they'd eat the fly. All you had to use was the Stuap orange and yellow tarpon fly. Didn't need any other pattern. Now it's like every year you gotta kind of fine tune your patterns and get something that maybe they're not seeing. Make longer casts. You really got to be skilled at moving the fly just right, getting it just in front of the fish. So it's getting a little harder, but if you stay with it, you can figure out how to do it. It's more difficult because you've got more boats out there competing. When I first started fishing, like the Broad Creek area, probably around 1980, and tarpon fishing out there, I'd go out there, there'd be 2 other boats out there fishing. That was it. There'd be Bill Curtis would be on Curtis Point. I'd be on the white spot at Broad, just south of that, and maybe I'd see Flip Powell out there or another boat, or Kermansky or one other boat out there, and that was it. And you felt like it was crowded then. You know, now you go out there in tarpon season, you might have a dozen boats within about a half-mile area, you know, lined up on each flat and each channel as you work your way south. But there's still, it's a huge area. You can fish anywhere from way up near Soldier's Key all the way down basically to Key West, but I'll fish down to about Garden Cove. So you got a huge area to fish.